Ladies and gentlemen, welcome to the new episode of the Introduction Podcast. Today, I'm happy to announce our newest guest, Rafael. Please tell us more about yourself, and we're all excited to start the podcast and start the episode.
Hey, Nick, thank you so much for inviting me. My name is Rafaeel Chaudhry. I've been in the IT and tech space within the Toronto area and Waterloo for the past 20 years. I've worked in FinTech, banking, and other sectors here, billing sectors here in Canada. Served a lot of, I think, most of the enterprise clients here in North America. And now I also consult for nonprofits, SMEs who can't afford big tech budgets. So that's my brief introduction, and just love volunteering, helping people across the board.
That's amazing. Let's make this podcast a great leverage to reach a lot of audience, a lot of folks. And if you're listening to this and you feel that, man, I wish my friend listened to this, just don't be shy, send them an episode, say, hey, talk to Rafael, and it's going to be great. Because the first question that I wanted to ask you is actually about the budget. You publicly wrote that the biggest AI risk right now, it's not picking the wrong model. Like, it's not the technology risk per se, it's being really successful in burning tokens and spending your budget. That's the biggest risk. Can you tell us more about your logic? What did you mean when you were writing that post, and expand a bit on the topic? Why do you think that being really successful in burning the budget is actually the biggest risk?
Yeah, so I think this comes up constantly when I'm talking to small business owners or nonprofits that I'm working with who wants a good solution, and which is not costing them much, but actually solving their issues. So, and the first question, as you said, I never ask about the tech. I just ask them, what if all of your team starts using this every day?
Mm-hmm.
And this matters for the smaller organization than the bigger one, because a larger company, a bank, or enterprise, or they would always have a risk team, and they would have an IT department. I work for a bank; they have a big risk team there as well. And who would notice how things are scaling up? You must have seen, Uber and everybody else saying, "Oh, but we have burned these much tokens." But when you're working with a smaller team where there's not a proper finance team, it would really, like, the tokens would burn really fast and nobody would notice. So let's just say an example would be that a 10% nonprofit usually doesn't have it. It's that they have 3 or 4 people wearing different hats. And if the usage triples, nobody's watching it. So the real risk here is not the bad model. It's a good tool that nobody has planned for success, because now everybody's coming in, comparing policies, comparing, all of other things. And now the usage is exponentially going up. And until the real bill comes in the administrator's email service, nobody's going to use that. So I think the bigger thing is what are you trying to accomplish? What is the right technology? And how can we give you the solution in the lowest cost possible? And even, I think in the most cases, what I go back to a couple of them is that, hey, even if you can just solve this issue with a basic knowledge base rather than creating an AI solution around it.
Mm-hmm. So basically you're saying that before solving the problem, look at the different instruments, maybe AI is going to be solving the problem, but it's going to be a very expensive solution. And then also very interesting that you mentioned that a lot of leaders, they do not provision AI to succeed. And once you bring the conversation to them, so what does usually happen when you go and you say, hey, listen, what if your usage goes 10x? What really happens at the moment? Do you see them frightened? Do you see them in the moment, like when you caught them in something that they didn't plan? And that's risky, because this part seems very interesting to me. Like most of the executives that I know, they are thinking, oh, how do I make AI work? And then they're pissed off when AI doesn't work, and they don't know who to blame. Is it the governance? Is it, the team? Is it the POC? Is it use case? Is it the vendor? But in the end, if it's the own decision of a leader that didn't even think that this thing can succeed, then it's a very weird thing.
I think what I would say is that, and generally says that never announces itself, right? It just starts, your model just starts by answering FAQs. Then, as I said earlier, then someone would come and say, hey, come and, summarize the document, draft an email, compare the policies, help with the grant proposal if it's like a nonprofit. So each task initially feels small,
Mm-hmm.
and it's like, oh, it did fine last time. Let's try this too. But a couple months later, when people and the adaptation has taken place, it has now become the team's AI colleague or best friend. So that's generally a win, but it also means that the governance and cost show up rightly when nobody has planned for them, because
Mm-hmm.
everyone planned for that FAQ bot, not the colleague part of it. For the a non-profit, this often creeps up around the donor data before anyone's asked where it should be flowing through a tool. It was never vetted for. So when we are in a bank, we we have this whole governance team of how the data is supposed to be governed,
Mm-hmm.
where the data is flowing, where it is stored. Within nonprofits, if you see the data is being stored and only few people have access to it. But now when you've connected that tool to it, there's like people have access around it. So when you say that, hey, how actually it looks inside a company, things change, costs go up. So I think even a nonprofit, if it's like we have done it for few nonprofits where, if you're trying to set it up, you have to have the proper governance model around
Mm.
it.
And you also mentioned this when you were saying about an FAQ assistant. How does it actually look like inside of a company when, like, you have an FAQ assistant and now suddenly all of your team starts using this FAQ assistant as the knowledge base, as your as the team's AI colleague, when it wasn't really initially planned in the design? Have you seen the use cases where that AI tool or that AI instrument or integration, whatever that was, suddenly became something more than it was planned in design? Is it a bad situation? Is it a good situation?
I would say that it depends, right? Some organizations can afford it, some organizations cannot.
Uh-huh.
I feel like FAQs have already existed, right? So like you go to a normal website and the FAQs are there. You can search it, control F it and find it. You can also go to a knowledge base section on the website and just type it out.
Uh-huh.
Like it's like on a shared server, the cost is fixed. No, nothing is being charged. But now that when you've added a conversational element of it into the
Uh-huh.
mix, every time a question is being asked, whether you're asking it or your donor is asking it, whether your sponsor is asking it, anybody who has access to that public tool on the website or anywhere,
Money.
there's a money being burnt around it.
Yeah.
Because earlier it was just one fixed cost that you were paying to your service provider or the cloud provider, or whether it be just your like a shared hosting provider.
Uh-huh.
But now this thing just keeps the cost as much as is. Now you had like you had 10 donors initially. Now that you have 20 donors who have started asking and questioning what is the administrative cost of your charity, how your funds are distributed. So every question that's being asked is like a money being burnt, right?
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. It's going to be a funny strategy for competitors to, abuse this system to create a big bill on the competitors' end. What about in your experience working with, SMEs and nonprofits? When you go and you design a plan for the rollout and it's all very nice and it's clean and everybody's happy about the plan on how the new integration or implementation of AI is going to look like, but then you go and you do the implementation and the reality can be a little bit different. So in your experience, what usually breaks the first between the plan and when the contact with reality happens? What do you think is the biggest part that most of the nonprofits and SMEs are missing when they're thinking about making their first successful AI project?
If I have to summarize it, I would say that plans that we make usually assume that the whole team would adapt something together,
Uh-huh.
and it would be a nice curve from there, right? But what I have seen is that the real small teams never do that.
Mm.
One, what I've seen is that in one like if somebody who's like a tech savvy, he would become an obsessive power user of it in a week, and he would build, workflows around it, like using their internet. So I've seen people doing some crazy stuff with Power BI, connecting everything, just making their task easy. And then there would be people who are either just, there's an age gap, they're volunteers, they don't want to learn technology, so they would just avoid it completely.
Mhm.
And then there would be a third type of people that I've seen that who would only trust it at one task. So if I'm a payroll administrator, or if I am just, I have to send a weekly donor data or weekly or monthly donations list to somebody, I have a task automated. I'm just coming in and just running it for one task, right? So you'll find different segments of these within the organizations.
Mhm.
So now, when I talk about these three segments or three or four different groups, there you just see the ungoverned version of the same tool.
Mhm.
So that's not really a planning failure. It's that the plan assumes that initial plan that we created assumes that we had a uniform behavior, but the small teams are never uniform. So everybody is going to use it on their own way. So I don't think when the leaders are planning it, they think, oh, everybody across the team is going to use it the same way, but that's not what happens.
Mm. And for the people that do resist the new way of doing things, more automated way or whatever AI is taking off their plate, and for the people that are resisting the change, where do you see that usually happens and in what form? Do they sabotage it? Do they just don't do it and don't give any feedback? Or are they very vocal? I know it's very hard to summarize how people are, but in your experience, for the folks where it's hard for them to adopt it or they do not want to adopt it for any reason, what's usually the form of their resistance and where it actually happens? Is it happening on the meetings with management? Is it happening on the meetings with the tech team? Is it just silently happening in their souls where they just slowly brew this disagreement in their hearts and just pretend everything's okay, but in reality it's not okay?
So personally, I have never seen any leadership who has now resistant to AI. Like I know initially there were things, especially in the not like I know within the bigger enterprise model, regulated environments, there is resistance. And like I don't think so there's resistance. Leadership is just being cautious because of the governance aspect of it.
Mm-hmm.
But within the smaller organizations, I think that's the least resistance that I've seen amongst the leadership. Like most of these organizations don't want resources to be spent. So, for example, there's a small nonprofit or charity who's been running their own website, right? And they are now used to be dependent on somebody, a volunteer, or a smaller company to build their website.
Mm-hmm.
But now they can just do all of that through Cloud Code or something like that. So they're not resistant. What I see is that the resistance itself comes from the informal keepers of the process. The person who has memorized that how every funders works, like every funder's reporting format, or always knows which exceptions are fine to prove. That knowledge is not usually written down anywhere. It's
Mm-hmm.
just lives with them. So, for example, like I can tell you, I run a nonprofit. There's a form that they have. The number formats always come in, with the country code. But when they have to enter in the system, that +1 has to be removed. So I remove it manually. Like there's no written process around it that I have to remove that.
Mm-hmm.
Then if some misinformation is missing, or you have to go in and find that information and plug that in. So none of that is written. And then there's like that same information of that intake form goes to different systems. So
Yeah.
somebody has just written it down high level. Okay, this has to go from this system to this system. Nobody actually has detailed out how it has to go. So in a nutshell, I would say is that the automating around that person makes invisible judgment suddenly visible. And
Mm-hmm.
that can feel threatening even when the tool's good. So I treat that resistance as information, not an obstacle. Sometimes the automation's missing context. Sometimes it means that the person's expertise was never properly recognized in the first place.
Mm-hmm.
So nobody knew what this person was doing or like how important that work was doing. But it starts becoming visible when you're automating it, then you figure out this person was doing all of this work. So, but yeah, to just high level answer that question, we went into segue is that itself is not from the leadership, and especially in the smaller SMB business side,
Mm-hmm.
is normally from the people who have memorized that process, who have been doing these things. They know what to do, but they have not properly documented it. So now, when you're trying to implement proper tools within smaller organizations which are not used to use all these tools, now you find like all these requirements or things that need to be met.
Yeah, it's true. And I'm very curious because what you mentioned about this undocumented decision logic that lives in someone's head, they just know that you have to do this thing. And you gave like just a little example with removing the plus, and imagine how much of these caveats are in the head of one person that has been doing this thing for like 10 years. It's a great knowledge. And I also understand the point that you mentioned where these people can feel threatened. So what is your silver bullet in terms of like gathering this knowledge from people? And also, how do you decide what context is necessary to feed into like AI to get it better in working, and what part of the process or this decision logic or judgment has to stay with the human that you would never like reach for it?
Okay, it's a loaded one, but just adding on to that additional context, right? I would say that it's just more of a simple automation task into a knowledge extraction exercise and a fairness check.
Mm-hmm.
Small organizations do not have a compliance layer testing that judgment for consistency. So you have to honestly ask whether it's a real expertise or an untested bias. So three questions I would say: reversibility. Can someone recover easily if it is wrong?
Mm-hmm.
The second would be explainability. Can I actually justify this specific decision in plain language if someone asks?
Mm-hmm.
And the third one would be population fit. Was the logic shaped by a real range of cases or just the easy visible ones? So for example, now drafting an email clears all three. You automate it, you decide which applicant gets fast tracked, usually falls at the least one, especially when the funders expect a fair process that stays with the person. But I still write the logic down either way.
Mm-hmm.
So keeping a human in the loop shouldn't mean the reasoning stays trapped in their head too.
Mm-hmm.
So when I'm writing down, I'm just when I'm doing any building any agent, when I'm automating anything, and when I normally don't say use the term agent, I generally try to say that I'm trying to automate as much as I can before we come to agents to do your task.
Mm-hmm.
But regardless, at that moment you say, okay, why this human who's doing this, and we need to take this thing out from their head to make sure that the systems that we create have that explainability why we were doing that.
Is this gonna
Did that answer your question somehow? Or
It is answers, and it's also like a very nice seg what I next, because once you have an operator and they have an idea on how to automate their first real workflow, whether it's going to be with AI or without AI, what do you think is necessary? What would you recommend that operator to do before they actually do that automation? Because the idea may seem bright, because on the operator level you only see, this part of the frame. So what does you having this kind of a frame coming, seeing the big picture, what would you recommend for this operator to do or to check before they actually do anything? So what does your experience tell you?
I think in my professional career, my consultancy career, I've seen a lot of bad data.
Mm.
So, and that's what I say, that when vendors are demoing you something, they run on a very clean, acquired data that has been sanitized, that has been, normalized, and then that's what they're doing. But your
Mm-hmm.
actual data is never that clean. There's years of donor records merged and split. Naming conventions have changed. I know an organization that ran out of numbers, so they changed their naming conventions of the membership number. Then there's a temporary spreadsheet from 2019, which is still holding everything together. And none of that shows up in the actual demo that the vendor would be doing. And it rarely shows up in like when people are doing their research reports and showing their metrics and how they have such a clean benchmark. So the edge cases your data throws up and the fairness problem in the system are often the same failure wearing two names. The person who doesn't fit the pattern is usually the one your pilot group never included. And then you only find that by running it carefully on your real data. And I have done this, created something based on assumptions. And, then when we came out of it, we're like, okay, this doesn't work. We have to modify all of these things, write custom code, run this logic, sanitize this data. So that's, I would say that would be my answer, that these vendor demos would have all these issues.
Mm. What would you say to the leader that is very skeptical about governance and about cost control and things like that? They feel excited. They almost obsessed by doing something with AI, and they see a big enemy in people that try to slow them down. And you actually argue that this slowing down is actually not slowing down. It's in contrary, it's an advantage. So if you are left in a room with this person, what kind of arguments would you use to explain your point of view? Why do you think it's an advantage? What do you want to say to the skeptical leaders that are in the audience? Because they may only see the world in one color.
I think, Nick, have you seen those images on the web where they say, oh, there's a proper built building, but there's a underlying foundations and is broken
Like on
because
sticks.
it was vibe coded, right? And then and I agree to it somehow. So when I'm talking to these leaders, right, my goal is that I make the case with the cost because that's what actually lands, right? And then also governance. So an AI tool with no owner, no monitoring, no documented limit isn't fast. It is like an unpriced liability and the bill shows up eventually. I was like, you must have seen like a lot of stories on the web, how the bills of new people, like they got even like Khan
Yeah.
Academy, Khan Academy, you've seen that eventually they figured out that the agent has done like a lot of months of work. But regardless, what the point I'm trying to make is that there's a cost fight, and then the funder is asking a governance questions you can answer. So that's real for the smaller organizations, that the funders and the enterprise clients are starting to ask how AI tools are governed before they'll sign. So all of the discussions that I have, I try to do that governance discussion first because I know that if we won't do that, literally after a month, this tool is shutting down. So frame that way, governance isn't that break. It is what lets a small team scale with confidence instead of hoping, nothing breaks. The organizations moving fastest aren't the least governed, I would say, but they're the ones who never have to freeze a rollout to go find an answer they should have already had. So if you have had a proper governance framework, and you're building on top of that governance framework, everybody knows what the tool should do, can do, cannot do. Then I don't think so. If that governance model is done, how the limits would be implemented, I think that gives the leaders also kind of they appreciate, and I've had those conversations where when you are selling something, you always want the business. And I have had people who have come to me and said, hey, Raf, like said, thanks for the discussion. We were not approaching this problem that way. And seems like that's not the like going this route, building these tools is not the right way for us at this moment of time, because we were not thinking about the things that you had brought into that meeting. So that's my ethical way of doing the business rather than just getting a quick opportunity, making a buck, and that tool
And
shuts
moving
down.
on. Yeah. Well, eventually, as with any technology, AI will get cheaper and it's going to be easier to use it. It's going to be way more adoptive in a way. That's why you're doing what you're doing. And it's why it's important for nonprofits, for SMEs, for really any kind of organization to get their things right with AI right now, because then they have an advantage in terms of time on moving on their competitors or on the market, or just keeping their hands on the pulse. But from your position, the way that you see it, where do you think is the real advantage of doing AI right now? Where do you think this will bring companies like in the next 5 years? And what will happen to those that fail or just lazy or just don't do it, don't do anything?
I think the biggest thing that I can see is that the building is now commoditizing really, really fast.
Mm.
A decent assistant is something that almost any team that I've seen can build up in a week or so. Now the challenge itself is, and you were talking about different models, it become gonna become cheaper. You've seen that. You've seen Kimi. You've seen other open source models. You can go to Open Router. You can pick up the like best of the best models out there, or something that they can do your job. You can run them on your own system without running them on any or deploy on your own the
Mm-hmm.
open source models. But at the end of the day, it's still the governance aspect and cost management of it. So cost management, if we're running locally, I think won't. But the governance, what the tool can do, cannot do. So for nonprofits and small, medium enterprises, I would say that I trust when someone asks how a decision got made, being able to give a real answer that, okay, the reason we made this decision was this. And being small isn't a disadvantage there. A smaller organization, I feel like a leaner organizations can now build and discipline early, can
Mm-hmm.
move with more clarity. With the big ones still entangling AI, it doesn't know fully that exists. So, for example, like you build like as you must have heard that the bigger the next companies would be two people company, one people company. So even if you have that, like if that person is making that decision on the AI model, yeah, that's great. But I don't recommend that. You have to have few people there, especially advisors who help you what that should do. But regardless, on the other side of things, when you are doing this an enterprise data strategy, how everybody's going to use it. So, but I feel like that at this moment, the small companies are really at advantage. They don't need big dev teams. They don't need big QA teams, or they can run multiple agents, do a lot of stuff, get it done for cheaper, start earning really quick. So
Mm.
I would see that the companies would even the bigger companies would start getting leaner and leaner,
Mm.
but then the bigger overhead for those companies, especially the regulated ones, would come on governance, because now you would have to have managers and governance bodies governing those agents, governors governing those automated processes, so that none of the information is leaked. You must have heard about the leaks that
Mm.
somebody came and had a chat with the give us the Instagram passwords, and like the whole password database, kind of was people were able to get into, able to get hold of that. So you need to have those type of things to govern. And then you must have heard about even OpenAI trying to do experimentation where the OpenAI agent was actually writing instructions how to,
How to get away? Yeah, for
how
the
to
future versions.
for the future versions and stuff like that. So I think those are the things that are more important that for bigger organizations, because now imagine you have your health data, you have your messaging data. Like the data is the main thing, right? Like as I say, data is the new oil. So if those regulated, so those companies, bigger companies would have to focus on that. But I think smaller companies don't need to spend so much money, which I've seen, with buying SaaS solutions. So, and I've seen this that there's an organization who was had a solution for running payroll. They had a solution for doing accounting. They had a solution to do a few things, right? So they were paying a couple of vendors, being a small nonprofit. And what they've done over the time is that they've using Cloud Code and like these AI tools, they've automated a lot of their process, even their CRM. They are no longer using Salesforce or anything else.
Mm-hmm.
They say we don't need this big feature list. These are our use cases. These are our customers. This is how we interact with our customers or
Uh-huh. Uh-huh. Uh-huh.
stakeholders. And they have built their own CRM. They've integrated their payment. They've had the payment method through Stripe. So, but they're not using it through a tool for fundraising. They've just built it within their own
Yeah, yeah.
ecosystem. So everything is tied, CRM is tied, their own payments are tied, and so they're using their, essentially, instead of using 6 or 7 different vendors, now they're using their own ingrown built software, which they can, even if I am at that nonprofit, there would be similar 20 or 30 nonprofits. I would just probably go and sell it to them and say, hey, why are you guys paying these vendors? Why don't you guys use it?
Yeah. This is great. And this was amazing. For the audience, when they want to talk to you and just maybe ask you some additional questions, what's going to be the best way to get in touch?
The best way, my phone is always loaded with messages. Best way is LinkedIn. That's how you reached out to me as well. So Rafaeel.com, you can reach out to me. Just message me on LinkedIn. I normally accept everybody's, as long as it's not a spam. Somebody's telling me something and sending like hundreds of messages. I always try get to respond to it. Sometimes I'm delayed, but that's the best way to get to. And and I say that nobody who says to you right now that they're an AI expert is an AI expert. Yeah, it's just like in its an early stage, it's evolving every day. So I'm also a student learning using my previous tech knowledge and the governance knowledge to leverage that to get into this. But I would say that things are just starting out. So if
Yeah,
you are
they
not,
are. Yeah, yeah.
if you're not in there, just get in there, just try learning it as much as you can. And I'm hoping to learn actually from most of you who are listening to this podcast as well.
This is awesome. Thank you so much.
Thanks, like, for inviting me.